presence of the Lord is in this place, I can feel God's mighty power and God's grace. There's a holy hush around us. I see love in every face. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. As we heard in the daily word, the inspiration for this tune comes from the book of Genesis, in the story of Jacob, son of Isaac, grandson of Abraham. You might recall the story, but you might not. So remember, after purchasing from his older brother Esau the right to inherit his father's estates, Jacob tricks Isaac into giving him his blessing by pretending to be Esau. And then when his older brother discovers this treachery, he vows to murder Jacob. So Jacob has to flee. He flees to his uncle's house until hopefully Esau will calm down and he can return and the family can be reunited. So along the way to his uncle's house, Jacob falls asleep and has a dream in which he sees a ladder extending from where he's sleeping all the way into the heavens. And he sees angels moving up and down this ladder. And at the very top, suddenly appears Yahweh himself. Yahweh promises that he, Jacob, and his descendants will inherit and own this very land upon which Jacob is sleeping and having his dream. He says, no matter how many generations descend from you, and no matter where in the world they may settle, he makes this promise. He says, I am with thee, and will keep thee, whithersoever thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will never leave thee. I will never leave thee. And then again, as we heard in the daily word, when Jacob wakes up from his dream, he exclaims, surely the presence of the Lord is in this place, but I did not know it. I did not know it. Well, naturally, this story is a metaphysical treasure trove, and I'm sure Catherine could do a better job at this than I can, but I'm going to just hit some of the highlights. So Esau represents the physical, unconscious, mammal nature of human beings, and Jacob represents the thinking faculty. And the struggle that the two brothers undergo is the story of the struggle in each of us between error consciousness and spiritual realization. It's my daily struggle. Isaac's blessing on Jacob represents the divine desire for our higher consciousness to prevail. And the story of Jacob's ladder represents the unbreakable connection between our humanity with its attendant limitations of consciousness and the divine, omnipresent, all-loving principle that allows us to rise above these limitations. It also demonstrates the promise God's presence with and among us is unshakable and infinite. And Jacob's exclamation upon awakening from his dream is something we can also easily say. Surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. Surely the presence of the Lord is in me, wherever I am, and I don't know it completely. I don't know it thoroughly. I don't know it without question or doubt. So this is a reason that we gather here every Sunday, either in this room, in this very room, or together on Zoom, to deepen day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, our practice of the presence of the divine. To convert doubt into certainty, and hesitation into ease, and grace and serenity. To no longer withhold love, but to give it out of ourselves, to give it to our families, to our world, to give love with divine abandon. Now, we are willing every Sunday, and possibly in our own practice, to assert that there is only one presence, one power, the one love active in our lives and in everything, but our thoughts and behaviors do not consistently affirm this. Like Jacob, we often fall asleep to the fact of God's perfect presence. But the more we practice the presence, the more we awaken to it, and the longer it remains in our awareness. So, as God is always present, always here, always in me, always in you, no matter what, then surely it follows that I should be able to experience the consequences of this presence no matter what is happening outside of me, no matter what is happening inside my head. I should be able to absolutely rely on God's promise, as he told Jacob, that God is here in me, around me, outside me, always, forever, dynamic, loving, never disappearing for even a nanosecond. Now, I wish I could report to you that this is indeed my daily experience, that I know God's presence in and around me through thick and thin, through excitement and boredom, through the commonplace and the unusual, in sickness and in health, but that would be untrue. I do not always feel God's presence within. I do not always feel God around me. I do not always feel God active in my life. I do not always feel God active in the world today. And to the extent that I don't feel God's presence, like Jacob, even if I say it, I do not know it to be so. Nothing wrong with that. That's just the truth of my human experience. So the question is, how do I address this falling short of spiritual realization? How do I realize spirit in every day of my life? Realize spirit like right here, right now, standing here in front of us. Well, in our prayer circle this week, we listened to thoughts about this from May Rowland, the longtime leader of Silent Unity, as she addressed this question during her stewardship. 55 years she was head of Silent Unity, and she developed a meditation that she shared with folks at the village and at Tracy Avenue before the village. It's a meditation that's called, I Feel the Presence of God. And in this meditation, she hits the main points of our practice. Now, I commend to you listening to her leading this meditation. It's on the Truth Unity website, and it's really wonderful just to hear May lead us through this. Now, she starts this practice by observing this. She says, some of us talk about the presence of God, but many times we do not get into the feeling of his great transcendent power. We need to practice being still, not so much to think about the presence of God, but actually to feel it. Not to think about the presence of God, but to feel it. So right away she's hitting the key point. God's presence is something we feel. We do not encounter his presence by thinking about it. Bless you. Nice as that can be. No, the presence is what is in what we feel. Eric Butterworth emphasizes this point in Practical Metaphysics as well. There he writes, to practice the presence is to live constantly as if you believe that the allness of God, the divine potential for wholeness, were present in all of its totality at every point in space, which means in you and in every experience of your life and in every solid function of your body. To believe that what we feel in our experience and in the solid function of our body is divine presence. So let's consider the fact that as human beings, we're always feeling. Our bodies both create and react to sensations all the time. The challenge is that we are also capable of ignoring these sensations. Our brains are so powerful that they can divert our attention so that the hundreds of feeling inputs coming regularly from all parts of our bodies don't overwhelm us as we go through our day. And we learned this diversionary tactic early on as children. In the circumstances of our childhood, we develop the habits of deciding which sensations, feelings, and emotions we will pay attention to and which we will ignore. While in general this practice is a good thing, it can also lead us to lose touch with the sensations our miraculous bodies are always producing. This can lead us to ending up living way too much in our heads. Well, part of the challenge is that modern culture promotes living in our heads instead of in our bodies. It's just the way it is. I don't say it critically, it's just the way it is. We all know this from our own experiences. How often, let's see, this morning, how many people drove here? Okay. How often do we get in the car and end up at the place we were going to without any awareness of what was happening while we were driving? Without any awareness of our bodies sitting in the seats, of our hands on the wheel, of inputs coming at us, traffic lights, other traffic, speed, all those kinds of things. No, our minds automatically ran all that stuff, and we were completely out of touch with the sensations that were in fact happening as we were driving here, as part of the driving process. And that's just one example of how our brains are completely capable of blotting out feeling. But for spiritual realization, for knowing the presence of God in our bodies and minds, we must develop the discipline not only of noticing our thoughts, but equally of noticing our feelings. In her talk, May Rowland invites us to start this practice, as we did in the meditation, as Connie so beautifully led us there, by getting still and sitting in the silence. For you see, all noticing starts in the silence. Ms. Rowland said, Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is at hand. At hand. It's time for us to learn to live in the peace and harmony of God's thought for the world. If it is not possible for you to go to a quiet spot, you can create your own quiet spot wherever you are. And this is what most of us must do. And unity teachings show us how to be quiet, whatever our environment is. We find the kingdom in this quiet spot. Last week, we focused on this. This is what Emily Cady calls the secret place of the Most High. All spiritual realization starts here in the silence. And as May Rowland says, this quiet spot is not necessarily a place absent of sound. No, the quiet place is an intentional inner experience. We get quiet by choice, by focusing our attentions away from outside distraction and into the center of our being. This takes practice, of course. It takes discipline to find the quiet even in the noise. But this is what is required to develop the capacity to feel and to know God's mighty presence anywhere and everywhere. Our Unity co-founder, Charles Fillmore, created an affirmation that he used to enter into that quiet space within him. We may have all heard this, but I'd like to share it again. Fillmore said, "I am now in the presence of pure being and immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. I acknowledge thy presence and thy power, O blessed Spirit. In thy divine wisdom, now erase my mortal limitations, and from thy pure substance of love, bring into manifestation my world according to thy perfect law." Oh, how our minds want to take these glorious words and turn them into an intellectual exercise. I want to understand what Charles was saying. But today, let's avoid that temptation and instead try an experiment with feeling Mr. Fillmore's assertion. Feeling what's behind the words. As Eric Butterworth put it, words are really meaningless unless they direct us to consciousness, feeling, awareness. So in a moment, I will invite us to speak together the first sentence of this affirmation. So here's what I'd like us to do. As we're speaking these words, simply notice to the best of our ability how we're feeling as we speak the words. What's showing up in the temple of our bodies. And then I invite us to notice how we feel when we finish speaking. Okay? Any questions? Guess not. So I will say this in two pieces. I'm going to invite you to repeat after me each phrase. The first one goes like this. I am now in the presence of pure being. Together. I am now in the presence of pure being and immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. Together. And immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. So what did you notice? What sensations were you feeling in the body as you spoke these words? Where in your body were these sensations most noticeable? Did speaking these words produce any particular emotion? And if so, where was the emotion most intense? What did you notice? Perhaps you had no sensations. You can notice that too. So this is the audience participation part. I'd like you to find a partner and take a moment to share with each other what you experienced. What did you feel as you spoke those words? I am now in the presence of pure spirit. If you're on Zoom, like I said, if you're there with somebody, you can do this with your partner. If you're there alone, just take a time to write that down. So please, take a moment and share with each other, what did you feel when you spoke this affirmation? So thanks to everybody. I appreciate your indulging the old man at the podium. So I'd like to point out that whatever it is that we were feeling, or if the nothing was there that we were feeling, that was God presencing God as those feelings. Period. That's it. That's all there is to it. Surely if I can feel, then surely the presence of the Lord is in this place. God is not a distant, disembodied, bloodless being. Neither is God a dry principle or a mere set of spiritual laws. God is a living, breathing, infinite, loving presence begging to be felt by us in every moment of our day. Surely if there is only God, then in my felt experience, there is only God. Now we start here because our minds will never agree to the truth of this on their own. They won't. Our founders, particularly Emily Cady, told us over and over and over again, intellectual understanding is inadequate to spiritual realization. Our thoughts will never support this truth until they have been instructed by our feelings of God's presence to acknowledge this truth. We often have it backwards. We start with saying, I know this, and then hope our feelings catch up. No, it's got to be the other way around. I feel God, and then we tell our mind to acknowledge and affirm that that feeling is God. I am now and I am always in the presence of pure being and immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. When I open myself to this simple fact, then, as the hymn says, I can feel God's mighty power and God's grace. I can feel God's mighty power and grace. So, I have an idea for a practice for feeling God's presence this week. It's simple, but it will take discipline and commitment, which means most of us probably won't do it. But that's okay. Here's the practice. Set a timer. Say on your watch or on your cell phone for a period of time, say an hour, 90 minutes, 2 hours, whatever, it doesn't matter. And then set the alarm. And then when the alarm goes off, just notice how and what you are feeling. Just notice how and what you're feeling. And then affirm that in this feeling, in this experience, I feel I am in the presence of pure being and immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. That's it. Alarm, notice feeling, affirm being in the presence of pure being. Then reset the alarm and do the exercise the next time your alarm rings. So what this practice does is to teach ourselves to feel and to assert that what we are feeling is God presencing itself precisely as whatever we are feeling. What I am feeling is God. If I'm angry, God is presencing itself as anger. If I'm happy, God is presencing itself as joy. If I am frightened, God is presencing itself as fear or terror. There is no distance between God and me. There is no distance between God and you. There is no distance between God and the whole world. Now, over time, as we discipline our thoughts to assert that God presences God in everything we are feeling and sensing, I promise us that we will begin to feel peace and joy more frequently. When I know through the conviction of my emotional body that I am totally secure in the love and care of the infinite Father, Mother, God, I can only rejoice and be glad. Surely the presence of the Lord is in me now. Surely the presence of the Lord is in you now. I know this because I'm alive. I'm alive with the dynamic sensations and emotions that are God vibrating in me through my physical body. This is how I can feel God's mighty power and God's grace. The presence of the Lord is always here. By focusing on how we're feeling, we help discipline our minds into line with this truth. So even when I'm having a thought that says, no, that's not true, or that's a bunch of nonsense, I can then take the discipline to feel how do I feel when my mind says that, and go back to the feeling and go back to the affirmation. I'm in the presence of pure being, right here, right now. Last week in her meditation, Gail quoted the composer Mary Gauthier, who said, "Songs are what feelings sound like." Songs are what feelings sound like. So let's sing, and let's affirm the feeling of God's presence and feel what the sound of this feeling feels like as we sing together number 183. 183. I am the radiant life of God, and just be as up-tempo as you feel, Sharon. Shall we stand? 183.